Hello, my name is Jessie Romance, and I am the Committee Administrator for the Intimate Partner Violence Task Force. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Break the Cycle, Advocacy Resources for Surgeons Regarding Intimate Partner Violence. This webinar is hosted by the American Urogynecology Society, the American Academy of Ophthalmology, the American Association of Oral Maxillofacial Surgeons, the Society of Gynecologic Surgeons, and the American College of Surgeons. Before beginning, I want to remind everyone that you can submit questions during the webinar through the Q&A box, as there will be a live question portion at the end of the webinar. You may submit your questions anonymously. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the ACS YouTube channel for future viewing. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce you to today's moderator for the webinar, Dr. Carrie Sims. Dr. Sims is a trauma and acute care surgeon with research focused on intimate partner and gun violence. She graduated from the University of California, San Francisco School of Medicine in 1995 and completed her general surgery training at Massachusetts General Hospital in 2003. She subsequently finished her fellowship in traumatology and surgical critical care and obtained her PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Sims has been an active member of the American College of Surgeons and is a member of the ACS Intimate Partner Violence Task Force. As a member of this task force, she helped create the Intimate Partner Violence Toolkit, which can be found on the ACS website, and is dedicated to helping people find resources they need to overcome IPV. With that, I'll now turn it over to Dr. Sims. Dr. Sims?
Thank you so much for this kind introduction, Jessie. And thank you all for joining us today for our conversation about intimate partner violence, or IPV. Today, we will discuss advocacy and legal resources that are available to surgeons who are experiencing IPV, or for those who suspect IPV in our surgical community. IPV occurs across all genders, ethnicities, socioeconomic classes, and relationships. As such, it also affects surgeons and their friends, family members, and patients. Today, we are joined by Emma Zimmerman and Laura Kindy for what will undoubtedly be a very educational webinar. First, we welcome Emma Zimmerman. Emma is a congressional lobbyist with the ACS Division of Advocacy and Health Policy in Washington, D.C. In this role, she represents the college before the U.S. Congress regarding legislative and regulatory policies that affect surgeons and their patients. She previously worked as a health policy consultant, most recently with McDermott & Consulting. She also holds a master's degree in political science from the George Washington University. Next, we welcome Laura Kindy. Laura leverages her extensive trial experience as a deputy district attorney to assist clients navigating complex legal challenges, including divorce, custody disputes, as well as victims of violence. Laura attended the University of Colorado at Boulder for her undergraduate studies before moving to Denver's Central Park neighborhood to attend University of Denver Law School. During law school, Laura gained experience working with the Denver District Attorney's Office in their cold case and county court units. After graduating, Laura began her career at Boulder District Attorney's Office, focusing primarily on the sexual assault unit. There, she completed over 100 jury trials and negotiated thousands of resolutions, honing her skills in litigation and negotiation. This experience is integral to her current practice, where she works with victims of crime and handles divorce and custody cases. Laura has also worked extensively with medical professionals, both personally and in private practice. Laura is the daughter of an orthopedic surgeon and the sister of an OBGYN. She understands the unique challenges medical professionals face in family law matters, including but not limited to high net worth clients, student loans, and the challenges of shift work. Her deep familiarity with these issues allows her to offer informed and effective representation. In addition to her legal practice, Laura has been a prominent speaker on topics such as physician divorce, domestic violence, college and campus investigations, forensic interviews, and sexual assault investigations. Her contributions to the field have been recognized with prestigious awards, including Prosecutor of the Year in 2020 and the Champion for Children in 2019. Laura continues to apply her vast experience and expertise to provide exceptional representation of clients. I would also like to thank our participants of the webinar, and thank you all for being with us today. And so I will now turn it over to Emma for her presentation on advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sims. Let me just pull my slides up here. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. As Dr. Sims said, my name is Emma Zimmerman. I'm a congressional lobbyist with the ACS Division of Advocacy and Health Policy in Washington, D.C. And I'm here to talk about legislative advocacy, why it matters, how to engage, and the advocacy resources available to ACS fellows. So I'll start with why legislative advocacy is important, a little about the federal legislative process itself and how you can engage and make an impact as a surgeon and ACS fellow. And finally, I'm going to give an example of some of the advocacy work that ACS has engaged in that I think relates to the topic of this webinar today. So many of you are likely familiar with this, but these are the big picture areas of ACS's work. Advocacy and health policy is obviously what I'm here to talk about today. And it also happens to be one of the things that fellows frequently cite as one of the primary benefits of ACS membership, that the organization is working on your behalf in DC, and also that ACS provides multiple avenues for fellows to engage in advocacy. So why should you engage in advocacy? Something you hear a lot in DC is that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, and that is absolutely true. Healthcare policy is constantly changing with or without input from surgeons. And one of the reasons why I really love working in health policy so much is that the work never ends. Congress will always be working in this space. And the fact is that you all will feel the effects of those policy changes, good or bad. The vast majority of members of Congress are not doctors. So if we want them making good policy that's going to make your jobs and your lives and the lives of your patients better, they need your expertise. Surgeons are the experts on surgery. You know what is best for your patients. You are seeing the trends on the ground every day, and you are trusted advisors to lawmakers working on healthcare policy. They really want to hear from you. It has been shown time and time again that members hearing from constituents is key to influencing policy. These are some of the findings from one study that surveyed congressional staff. There have been many others, but just to give you an example here, over 90% of staff said that constituents visiting a member's office had some or a lot of influence on their policy positions, more than any other advocacy strategy. Mail and email outreach is effective. Surgeon's Voice is a great tool for that, which I will talk more about in a little bit. Social media is a great way to communicate and engage with members of Congress as well. They monitor that closely. It's a significant way that they gauge the attitudes of their constituents. All that to say that members of Congress hearing from you is much more effective at shaping policy than just having lobbyists like me go in and talk to them. I also think it's helpful to contextualize the federal legislative process a little bit. This here is one of my favorite political cartoons because I think it really perfectly represents how Congress operates. Congress moves very slowly and not a lot gets through. In your line of work as surgeons, you like to get in, get to the heart of the problem, fix it, and move on. Congress does not work that way. This is a long game. To give you some numbers, there were 15,066 bills introduced in the last Congress. That's the most of any Congress since the late 70s. Of those 15,066, 991 passed either the House or the Senate, 362 passed both chambers, and 358 were ultimately signed into law. So that's just 2.4% of introduced bills being signed into law, and that number is even lower in this Congress. There is a tremendous amount of dysfunction in Congress these days, that's true, but it's also important to remember that this process is incremental by design. Not all bills are good ideas, not all good ideas should necessarily become laws, and even great ideas are constrained by politics. And something we run into often is that preventing bad policy from becoming law is just as important as passing good policy. And this is why sustained advocacy is so important, because it often takes many years and multiple Congresses for a bill to gain the support it needs and find the right political climate to pass, but it is possible. So how can you get involved? ACS offers a lot of advocacy opportunities. Our annual Leadership and Advocacy Summit takes place in DC in the spring. Official dates for 2025 will be announced soon, but it will be sometime in April. That's where hundreds of fellows come to DC to participate in lots of policy-focused programming, as well as advocacy training. You learn about our federal priorities, and then you go to Capitol Hill to meet with your members of Congress. It's a great event. It's a beautiful time of year to come to DC. The cherry blossoms are out. I highly encourage anyone interested in advocacy to come to that event. Throughout the year, you also have access to Surgeon's Voice, which is our online advocacy platform. You see a screenshot of that here. It has lots of advocacy resources available to help you learn about the issues or set up meetings with your members of Congress. That's also where we post all our action alerts. So if you go on there, surgeonsvoice.org, you can see all of our active alerts on various bills that we're advocating for. And with just a couple clicks, you can send letters to your members of Congress in support of those priorities. It is super duper easy. Every August, we also put on our Advocacy at Home program. Congress is in recess for the month of August, which means all the members leave DC and are home working in their districts. So we give you all the materials you need to organize meetings with your members in your state. There's also the state chapter activities and your state lobby day, which are just as important to participate in. You can engage on social media. You can always contact us in the DC office if there's a policy issue that you're running into or that you're interested in that you would like to work on. And finally, you can contribute to Surgeons PAC, our political action committee. All of these are excellent ways to get involved. This is a non-exhaustive list of our federal priorities, just to give you a sense of what we're working on: reforming the Medicare physician payment system, supporting the surgical workforce, issues related to trauma care, cancer care, administrative burden reduction, physician well-being, health equity. The list goes on, and you can find more information on all of these topics on the federal legislation page of our website. But firearm injury and mortality prevention is the issue I'm going to highlight today. ACS as an organization has not been involved with federal legislation related to intimate partner violence specifically, but firearm injury and mortality prevention is an issue that certainly overlaps. Some data for context: 1/3 of women and 1/4 of men are victims of physical violence at the hands of an intimate partner in their lifetime. Female intimate partners are more likely to be murdered with a gun than by all other means combined. 60% of mass shooting events between 2014 and 2019 were either domestic violence attacks or perpetrated by those with a history of domestic violence. And an average of 76 women are shot and killed by an intimate partner every month. Keeping guns out of the hands of abusive partners is an active policy area. Extreme risk protection orders, also known as red flag laws, have been adopted by 21 states and territories to temporarily prohibit individuals from possessing or purchasing firearms when a court has determined that that individual may pose a threat of violence. In addition, the Supreme Court recently upheld a federal law that bars people subject to domestic violence restraining orders from owning a firearm. And this is an area that ACS has been engaged in for quite some time. The ACS Committee on Trauma, Injury Prevention, and Control Committee crafted a statement on firearm injury prevention back in the early 1990s, and over the years has really helped frame the public health approach to the problem of firearm injury. In 2017, ACS convened the Firearm Strategy Team, or FAST, work group, made up of surgeons, many of whom are firearm owners themselves. The group ultimately produced 13 policy recommendations across several areas. I've highlighted background checks and red flag laws as two that I think are the most directly related to intimate partner violence, though of course these are all interrelated issues. Then in September 2022, representatives from 46 organizations, including ACS, convened the second Medical Summit on Firearm Injury Prevention, which led to the creation of the Healthcare Coalition for Firearm Injury Prevention. That coalition is engaged in ongoing work to foster a comprehensive public health approach to firearm injury prevention efforts through education, advocacy, and community-centered activities. And many of the principles developed by ACS and other medical organizations over the years are reflected in public policy. In 2022, Congress passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, legislation that was endorsed by ACS, which includes several actionable measures for reducing firearm injury and mortality, including calling for implementing state-level red flag laws and stronger protections for domestic violence victims. This was the first major federal firearm safety legislation in nearly 30 years. And as you may have seen, more recently this summer, the US Surgeon General issued an advisory on firearm violence, which really emphasizes the public health approach and closely aligns with our principles. And while ACS certainly does not take full credit for these advancements, they are absolutely the result of sustained advocacy and engagement by surgeons and others. So the aspects of federal advocacy that I really want to highlight with this example are these three things. First, the long-term effort. Of course, firearms can be a particularly contentious issue. Legislation in this area runs into much bigger political hurdles than other topics, but it's still a good illustration that policy change at the federal level takes time and sustained advocacy. Second is collaboration, building consensus among stakeholders, bringing together various perspectives, areas of expertise that will always help your advocacy. The Healthcare Coalition for Firearm Injury Prevention that ACS is a part of is a great example of that team approach. And finally, applying the perspective and credibility of physicians. Trauma surgeons have a unique ability to advocate for firearm injury prevention as the ones often treating firearm injury patients. Likewise, that credibility extends to all specialties, all issues that you encounter in your lives, with your patients, in your practice. You really are issue experts. You see these things firsthand, and your perspective carries a tremendous amount of weight with policymakers. So lastly, I want to leave you with a call to action, something you can do today. We have an alert on Surgeon's Voice right now on legislation to expand background checks for private gun sales. I encourage all of you to go to surgeonsvoice.org. Very easy, take 1 minute. That's as long as it takes. Send a letter to your member of Congress in support of this legislation. That is all from me. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you, Emma. That was really enlightening. And before we turn to Laura, I just wanted to remind all that are online that if you have a question, we will have a question and answer section, part of the section. So please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom, placed in anonymously, and we look forward to hearing what questions our audience may have. So without further ado, Laura, will you take it away?
Absolutely. I'm just going to share my screen.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm going to start by talking about supporting survivors of domestic violence. This is a resource guide from surgeons, from an attorney's and an individual who's worked in domestic violence for years perspective. As Dr. Sims stated, I am the managing partner at Grimaldi & Kinde. We are a small law firm in the Denver, Colorado area, and we specialize on divorce and custody cases, specifically professional women and men and survivors of domestic violence. I have 13 years of experience as an attorney, and as Dr. Sims mentioned, for a long time I was at the Boulder County District Attorney's Office, and through that work got to see and work with domestic violence survivors, as well as officers who were investigating domestic violence and safe shelters who were working with victims of domestic violence firsthand. Through the work that we continue to do, we represent victims of domestic violence in their protection order cases as well as their divorce cases through different local shelters in the Denver, Colorado area. I am going to dive into some of the laws surrounding and legal options surrounding domestic violence. I just want the caveat to be that I am located in Denver, Colorado, so I am talking about Colorado law. Each state is a little bit different regarding what their laws are and what their legal options are, but for the most part, it should be fairly consistent, but when I'm talking about specifics, it is Colorado law. Just a kind of a roadmap of where we're going to go. I want to talk a little bit about recognizing some of the signs of domestic violence, understanding the resources that are available to survivors, and knowing how to meaningfully support a patient or a colleague who is going through interpersonal violence.
Domestic violence generally, there's a lot of definitions out there about what is domestic violence, what is interpersonal violence. And my favorite one is a pattern of behavior used by one person to gain or maintain power and control over another person in a previous intimate relationship. And that can be a physical abuse, that can be monetary or economic abuse, that can be emotional abuse, that can be verbal abuse. It can be a combination of all of those, and many times it is escalating in nature. Some of these statistics, Ms. Zimmerman already went over, but 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will experience interpersonal violence during their lifetime. Nearly 20 people each minute are physically abused by an intimate partner. If you just think about how long this presentation is and how many individuals are suffering from interpersonal violence during the time of this presentation, it's truly shocking. And then more than half of the cases of domestic violence are not reported to police and will never be reported to police. So what as physicians, what as surgeons, what as colleagues are you able to do to make sure that if someone who is seeing you medically or a colleague of yours is able to get the resources that they need in order to stay safe? I think something that's incredibly important to understanding and have a conversation about domestic violence is to understand the factors related to reporting. Like we just talked about, many of these cases will not be reported to police. Many of these cases will not be reported to anyone at any point. And so understanding why that's happening is incredibly important to being able to figure out what you can do to help whomever it is that's going through this. One of the biggest ones is going to be a belief that the abuse will end or that the abuser will change. As I'm sure you are all aware, domestic violence is very cyclical in nature. After big physical or big abusive interactions occur, then there is usually a honeymoon period after that where things are really good. And a lot of the times the survivor of domestic violence in that moment is believing that this means that change is coming or that this person will change. There's a lot of, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again, I've changed. And then as time goes on, the tension builds and ultimately there are more incidents escalating in nature to ultimately an incident that will then again cause that honeymoon period. And that is not how all domestic violence occurs, but that is something that has been, that's seen in many, many cases. Another one is going to be fear of loneliness or fear of the abuser's loneliness. Many times these relationships have been going on for a long time. There is trauma bonds, there is co-occurring substance abuse or co-occurring mental health that's going on. And so fear about the abuser's loneliness or how the abuser will handle it once that the survivor is no longer there is absolutely a factor. Lack of confidence in the police, district attorney's office, judicial system. I work with so many clients who are terrified to report because they've had a situation where they reported to the police and the police ultimately didn't do anything. And so that caused everything to get worse and everything to escalate and actually didn't help their safety, but made things worse. So I think really understanding that that's a legitimate fear for someone who's in one of these situations. Cultural or religious constraints, lack of resources. If someone is completely dependent on the abuser for financial resources, it is going to be very difficult for them to figure out a way where they can leave and where they can leave and take care of themselves, take care of their children if children are involved, and be able to maintain the basic resources that they need. Addiction. I mentioned this previously, but a lot of the times, whether it's the abuser or the survivor of interpersonal violence, there is addiction that is going on. Fear of retaliation or escalation, similar to what I was talking about, where someone reports and then ultimately the police don't do anything about it. If they're that can cause escalation, and if whatever occurred maybe is not harsh enough to cause it to stop, no matter what this, kind of depending on what the situation is, then there can be retaliation based on the reporting. Mental health of the survivor is absolutely can play a role, and the children, and is another huge factor of how am I going to manage, what am I going to do? They're going to come after custody. What will that look like? Why physicians play a critical role in determining whether, or in reporting and encouraging people to potentially report and get out of domestic violence situations, whether they report or not. One of the big pieces is that when you are seeing patients, it's in a safe and trusting space. People overall trust their physicians, they trust their medical care providers, and when they are being seen by medical care providers, they are in that safe and trusting space. Another one that just speaks for itself is that you have an understanding of injuries. If the description doesn't match the injury, or there's a vague description for an injury that would be a very obvious how it was caused, connecting injuries or illnesses or ailments that could be due to abuse or side effects of abuse. One that I have saw with a client of mine was she was having insanely severe headaches while she was in the midst of an abusive situation. And she was actually going to the doctor regularly to try to figure out what was going on because she thought she was suffering from some really serious migraines. And come to find out it was the stress of what she was under. And so, being able to connect potential injuries or ailments that could be related to the situation that they're in. The physician-patient privilege, I think that gives patients a comfortability in talking about what is going on with them because they know that there is that privilege. Asking questions regarding feeling safe at home. I know a lot of different medical facilities require that medical professionals ask those questions. I know every time I go to the doctor, you get the question of, do you feel safe at home? And while most of the time, even someone who's going through interpersonal violence is going to have the answer of, yes, I feel safe at home. That is not always the case. And you never know when that question is going to hit someone at the right day on the right time, and they are going to explain what's going on. And then again, a safe space to provide resources and support, even if not ready to report at that time. And we're going to talk through some of those resources and support that you can provide as a physician. What to look for: anxiety, depression, withdrawal. Frequently missed appointments or last-minute cancellations. When a life is in chaos due to violence in the home, that is something that often occurs. Partner that's always present during appointments, even when it doesn't, necessarily make sense. Injuries inconsistent with explanations. Bruising or injuries in various stages of healings with no explanation. Frequency of injuries. Multiple medical providers with no explanation, seeing multiple different people for different injuries or different urgent care facilities because of different multiple and frequent injuries, and hoping that it doesn't kind of catch up, or the abuser's hoping it doesn't catch up. Changes in performance at work with no explanation. This would be more for a colleague, or again, for a colleague, frequent calls or unplanned visits from a partner. None of these are determinative. None of these are the smoking gun. All of these can have innocent explanations, but when you're starting to see these things regularly, or one or more of them, it can make you at least pause and consider what might be going on. Some legal considerations for you. I think the biggest thing as a physician is what can be disclosed, what cannot be disclosed, and what must be disclosed as a mandatory reporter. States across the United States have different rules on mandatory reporting for domestic violence. Obviously, for child abuse, it's pretty consistent, but for domestic violence, there are different rules in each of the states. So being familiar with your laws in your state is extremely, extremely important. And, if you have an incident that's coming up, talking with your hospital or your practice's legal advisors to know, again, what can be disclosed, what cannot be disclosed, and what must be disclosed. And again, that conflict between HIPAA and mandatory reporting laws, and making sure that if you are having to report something under mandatory reporting laws, there's no violation of HIPAA. Documentation is extremely important. As a lawyer who prosecuted domestic violence cases for years, and now as an attorney who brings domestic violence cases in divorce and custody situations in front of the court, medical documentation is incredibly important. This could, when you are making a documentation after someone who's come in and either disclosed domestic violence, or you have concerns about domestic violence, this could become evidence. The hearsay rules around medical providers are different than others. So if statements are made for medical treatment, those statements are considered non-hearsay and can be admissible in court. So making sure that you document what exactly was said, and objectively documenting what you are observing, rather than documenting it either with doubt of the survivor that's talking to you about what's going on, or on the other side in clear support for that individual, making sure you are objective in that documentation of what you are seeing as a medical professional. Many of these cases, like we talked about at the very beginning, are delayed reports. And so when they're ultimately ready to talk about the domestic violence that they've endured, a lot of the times there's not great evidence of what happened. And so medical information, if they did disclose to a medical provider, can be extremely important in these cases. Photographs, if you have the ability, if it's an injury case, a bruise case, if you have the ability to take photographs and document those in your charts, that's extremely helpful. And again, I already discussed on this, but record findings objectively and not in support of the patient or the doubting the patient. What to do, the do's and the don'ts. So we're going to start with the do's. The first thing is listen. If someone is at the point where they are disclosing the abuse that's occurring to them, make sure you can listen. The next piece is start by believing. You are not do not have to be the judge in this case. You do not have to be the police that decides if a crime was committed or not. You are able to listen and document what is being disclosed to you in an objective manner. Offer resources and assistance. We'll talk about some of the resources that are out there that you can offer here in a few minutes. Document. This is so important. It is evidence. It can be used as evidence to support that survivor later down the road. Offer ongoing support if this is the type of patient that you have a ongoing relationship with, making sure to check in with them and see how they are doing. Set appropriate boundaries regarding confidentiality. If you live in a state where it is not, or practice in a state where mandatory reporting laws do not you don't have to report domestic violence, but you do have to report child abuse, and someone provides information about child abuse, make sure that you're clear about what you do have to report and what you don't have to report, so that they know what to expect and they can protect themselves however necessary. And then build trust by listening, by starting by believing, by doing all of these things. The don'ts. Don't try to fix the situation. Sorry, let me go back. Don't try to fix the situation. Don't push them into something they are not ready to do. If that's reporting to police or filing for divorce, don't push them into that situation. Don't minimize their experience, and don't judge. Those are things that will shut down someone very quickly if they're finally at the point where they're reporting. I want to talk briefly about some different legal options that are available for survivors of domestic violence. The first one's going to be reporting to law enforcement. The pro about this one is going to be that you have some immediate response from law enforcement and potentially an immediate protection order that goes into place. The con of this one is going to be that it is completely outside of the survivor's control. Whether the police press charges or not is up to the police and the district attorney, and not up to the survivor in any way, shape, or form. Civil protection orders, that is a non-divorce or non-allocation of parental responsibility legal option, and it will allow, it's an emergency hearing, so it happens quickly, but the laws surrounding protection orders in each state are very specific and sometimes can be very hard to meet all the requirements. If married, divorce is always an option. This is permanent and can bring up protection orders within this matter. So civil protection orders can be brought up in a divorce case. But again, that can be a very slow process. And a lot of the times these individuals need immediate protections, and divorce cases can be a slower, longer kind of step 2 process. If they have children together, but are not married, they can do an allocation of parental responsibilities case. Similar to a divorce, there are different protections that can be brought up in regard to the children, but the court doesn't have jurisdiction over the parents, so they can't do a civil protection order in that case. And again, this can be a really, really slow process. So, all of these options have kind of pros and cons, and making sure that the survivor needs to make sure that they have legal counsel that is aware of the different options for survivors of interpersonal violence and is able to advise them in their specific situation with the specific type of abuse that they are suffering, what is the best option. Non-legal options, the biggest one is going to be local shelters. I'm in the Denver area. We have tons of different local shelters that all offer similar services, counseling services, advocates available, lower no-cost legal services, safety planning, and shelter and housing assistance. So, being familiar with what are the local resources where you practice, and if you practice in an area where there are not a ton of resources, then definitely being aware of the national hotlines that are up that are stated down below, because those, while they don't have the breadth of services available to help people on a daily basis, they do have the availability to connect people in the area if you are practicing in a smaller or more rural area where you don't have as many local shelters or resources. The other non-legal option that can be done with trusted professionals, people within your office, their friends, their family, but encouraging safety planning. Safety planning kind of has three different parts. It's going to be, what do you do during an incident? Who are safe? Where are safe places? Who are safe people? Are there specific code words that those safe people need to know? The second part is preparation, or being prepared to leave if an incident occurs that requires you to leave, or you decide it's time to leave. Do you have the items that are necessary? Medications, identification, money. As physicians and surgeons, you might be able to help with that medication piece if appropriate. Where do they go? How do you get there? These are questions that need to be discussed of the preparation aspect of safety planning. And then the last piece is after leaving, making sure that they have that information for local resources, national resources if local resources aren't available, and then also being prepared for their legal options and knowing what their legal options are so that they can pick the best option that keeps them safe depending on their specific circumstance. There is my contact information. If you ever have questions regarding a situation or a colleague or a patient, I'm happy to talk through them hypothetically. Or if you have any other questions or comments, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Laura. That was really, really terrific. We now move to the question and answer portion of our discussion. So again, just as a gentle reminder, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the question and answer box at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and we can see who is best to answer that and open it up to the panelists. We have some already, so we'll just get started. Thank you, Dr. I'm going to butcher your name here. Sorry, Dobertine. So sorry. Workplace violence is an epidemic today. Besides IPV, has the ACS and your team thought about involving the ACS on all types of workplace violence that affect surgeons on a daily basis across the United States? I'm so thrilled that you actually asked that question. And in fact, we do have some things that are happening with workplace violence. There was a recent statement from the regents from the American College of Surgeons that they put out at the Clinical Congress that talks about workplace violence. Additionally, there is a task force that's being assembled to work on this with the American College of Surgeons, because it really is a huge priority. And I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't become one of the things that the task force, or the advocacy group, would be working on a national level as well. You're absolutely right. We have a lot of challenges with workplace violence in general and intimate partner violence in specific. I hope that answered your question. And then they will be placing the web link to the statement put out by the regents. I think it'll be put into the question and answer box. Is that correct, Kathleen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you. All right. So the next question we have here is by the same physician. Thank you again. How can health systems best screen physicians and other employees for intimate partner violence? What are the best practices in prevention? My health system does not screen and only reacts after an event has occurred. So I'll open that up to either Laura or Emma. Any thoughts on that?
I cannot speak to sort of those internal administrative practices, unfortunately, but I did want to just mention on the first question about workplace violence.
Okay.
Also, the ACS has endorsed a bill, the Safety from Violence for Healthcare Employees Act. The SAVE Act is the acronym.
Perfect.
Provide federal legal protections from assault and intimidation for hospital employees. So just to say that, yes, our advocacy team is aware of that issue, and we've got some legislation on it.
Oh, I'm so glad. I knew you were probably all over it. But I have no idea of all the things that you guys are working on. So thank you so much for that. Laura, any thoughts on screening health systems for IPV, or are we in a state of where we just have to react?
So I have not actually heard of any agencies or health systems that are screening for intimate partner violence by like within their colleagues and their other surgeons and different colleagues within the system. I have not heard of that occurring. I mean, I think the biggest thing, just kind of from a anecdotal perspective, is making sure that people feel supported in work. And if the concerns are coming up, like if we're seeing a drop off in production, that could be because of a million different things, but making sure we're asking the question and checking in with people when we're seeing those signs.
Great. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I haven't heard anything in the but I do have a question about to that point. Say you are worried that someone has an intimate partner violence and that violence may spill over into the workplace. What would you recommend just in terms of like letting security know, or letting like who should know about this? Because I mean, I think we all observe these things, but we have nowhere to really turn. So where would you recommend?
That's a great question. So anytime I have a survivor who's able to get a protection order, and I'll talk about without a protection order in a second, I recommend that they give a copy of that protection order to the place of employment. So the administrators for the hospital, as well as security for the hospital, and make sure that a picture is included with both of those. If you are a hospital that has like a subsection of a police department within your hospital or nearby your hospital, making sure that they are aware of this information as well. As Ms. Zimmerman was talking about earlier, there is a huge correlation between domestic violence offenses and mass murders. And so, really making sure that anyone who is related to security within the system has that protection order. Now, it gets a little bit more difficult when you have a hospital environment or a public environment, and you have a situation where there's no protection order. So you're trying to keep someone out of somewhere that might be a public place, and they don't, but there's these concerns about IPV. That's when I recommend talking with administration, talking with the security or police within that area, and coming up with a safety plan for what to do if that occurs and how everyone within that department will handle it.
Wonderful. And it looks like Jesse has just placed the link to the ACS workplace violence statement in the chat box. So you can take a look at that. Thank you very much for that. The next question we have is, many institutions, surgical departments have intimate partner violence screening performed by nursing staff versus other institutions have the screening done by surgical providers. Are there any evidence or recommendations on who should be performing the screening to increase survivor reporting?
I have no specific evidence on that. I would be really interested in that, and it's something that I will look into, but I just personally probably believe that it would likely be reported more frequently when it was the actual surgical provider that was asking those questions, just because the nature of the relationship.
Yeah, I don't know. To that question, I don't know if there's actually been a study to look at nursing versus surgeons. I do know that there are studies to suggest that surgeons don't really they feel very uncomfortable asking people about intimate partner violence, and so are reluctant to do it. That being said, when survivors are actually asked about their experience with people asking, they're just grateful that somebody asked. So I don't think it necessarily needs to be a nurse versus a surgeon actually asking the question. I think the most important part is that it's someone asking, and asking in a way that's not perfunctory, where you're just like, when I was at a trauma institution, we at one place that I worked at, the question, the JCO requirement to ask this question was sort of shouted at the patient after we've taken off all their clothes and like gotten them ready for the CT scanner. So it was like not an ideal time to be kind of asking these important questions. It was really just to check the box. So I think making sure that it's not perfunctory and then really opening up as an open-ended question. There are data to suggest that if the person matching the person with a similar person asking those thoughtful questions can increase the perception of safety. So if it's a woman, having a woman ask those questions, if it's a African-American, having the African-American asking the question, if it's a gay person, having another gay person asking those questions, it can sort of open up make people feel a little bit more relaxed and safe. So just asking that, and then asking it in a way that doesn't make the person even more embarrassed about it. So one of the interesting things is that many people who are victims of intimate partner violence don't believe that they're actually victims because they've been raised in households where violence existed. Perhaps they watched their parents fight and become physical. Maybe they were physically abused as children themselves. So violence is perceived as a normal part of a relationship, and asking it in a way that sort of suggests that this happens, but it's not right, and we can help you. Is probably the most important. That was an excellent question. Thank you so much. All right. So what is the best, the next person asked, what is the best definition of intimate partner violence or domestic violence?
I think this is really subjective, and there is a million definitions out there. The one that I personally think does the best definition of interpersonal violence, just because it gives the like biggest breadth of the behaviors that are included, is a pattern of behavior used by one person to gain or maintain power and control over another person in or previously in an intimate relationship.
Excellent. Let's see here. Yeah, that's an excellent definition. The next question is, I'm a medical student currently doing research on addressing intimate partner violence in the medical school curricula. What recommendations do you have for improving medical student education on IPV or domestic violence?
I mean, I think what the American College of Surgeons is doing right now is perfect. I mean, I think talking about it, bringing the issue to the forefront, having conversations about it, and making sure that people are aware of resources that are out there for them or others.
I would also encourage you to potentially reach out to the AAMC, the American Association of Medical Colleges. That's the organization here in DC that represents medical schools, and they're a little bit more directly involved in medical school curricula than ACS is. I don't know what resources they might have or the extent that they're involved, but might be worth checking them as well.
I thank you so much for that excellent question. I would also like to echo everything that's been said, but add that one of the important elements to a medical school curricula is not just thinking of intimate partner violence as something that occurs to other people, to patients, but to recognize that it actually occurs to your colleagues in medical school. And in fact, but most people who have been victims of intimate partner violence, the violence actually starts in their early 20s. So that's when you're in medical school. So if you look around and you see your colleagues, many of them may be actually experiencing this kind of behavior in their dating relationships or their marriages. And so really being mindful that it's not just an other problem, it's not just a patient problem, but that it's actually a problem with society, and it could be your friends who are actually experiencing this as well. Dr. Joseph goes on to say, I would like to direct the question to Ms. Kindy. You mentioned picture taking, which is essential in these cases. How does this reconcile with the recent statements from some institutions essentially forbidding picture taking of any kind? How does this work when the patient refuses having pictures taken for fear of retaliation? Are there any laws or bills in place that can help with this?
So I can answer the first kind of questions. Obviously, if your institution forbids this, you have to follow the policy of your institution. That being said, if it's an available option to you and your patient is on board with it and it is medically supported for what you are seeing this patient for, then that is when it makes sense. If it is something that is way beyond the scope of your work, then there's obviously other options available to you about what you could be doing in that point. But if it's way beyond the scope of why you're seeing this individual or forbidden by your institution, then it's absolutely not something that you should be partaking in. Any specific laws are in bills that could help with this. I'm not aware of that, and Ms. Zimmerman might be able to speak more to that if there are any specific bills or laws that are in place or trying to be in place that would allow this to occur regularly. I can tell you there's nothing in place nationally that keeps it from happening other than potentially institutions' policies.
I'm not aware of anything at the federal level on that. I suspect that may also be somewhat of a state issue. I would think it probably varies more locally.
All righty. So moving on to the next question, do you think that it is better to screen all psychiatric patients for IPV because higher prevalence of mental health disorders and substance use is higher in the IPV population? Thanks.
I would defer to the medical professionals on this one. That being said, I mean, obviously we see a lot of situations where there's IPV co-occurring with mental health and co-occurring with substance abuse disorder.
I would certainly say that, I am a proponent of universal screening. So everybody should be screened for intimate partner violence. We did a study at the University of Pennsylvania where we looked at trauma patients who came into the trauma bay, and 50% of the people who endorsed intimate partner violence were actually there for mechanisms that you would never have thought of. So like equestrian accidents or car accidents. So I think taking the stance of a universal screening is actually probably the best way to make sure that we're actually talking to all of the people. Dr. Bell says, do most hospitals have forensic nursing programs that specialize in IPV that are utilized for employees as well as patients? That's an excellent question. I don't know, honestly. If you have a forensic group that does that, that's fantastic, but I am not aware that that's a universal thing.
So yeah, and I don't think it's universal at all. In the Denver area, there's different hospitals that do use forensic nurses for domestic violence cases, but there's others that only use them for their SANE programs. So I don't think it's universal at all. And also you need to be at the point where you're coming in and reporting a domestic violence incident in order for the forensic nurses to be utilized, usually at recommendation of law enforcement, at least what we're seeing in practice in most of those cases. So just someone coming in with maybe injuries that are concerning is not going to be seen by a forensic nurse.
All right, so moving on to the next question here. It says, as a female surgeon, I allowed my pediatrician ex-wife to take the lead on our 4 children's needs from newborn formula to pediatrician appointments. She had a terrible temper and threw my phone at me, broke it against the wall, kept all of our financial information away from me, and was emotionally abusive. Her mother and sister asked me if I was safe. That's what helped me realize that this was not normal. During the divorce, she used the fact that I was a SX against me. I'm not sure what that means.
A surgeon, maybe? It is a surgeon against me.
Yeah, maybe. So what are your thoughts, Ms. Kende, about that? Like, what are
unfortunately, we do see, I mean, I guess, first of all, thank you for sharing your experience. Like Dr. Sims was talking about in relation to medical school, students who are suffering from domestic violence and interpersonal violence. Like I talked about kind of at the beginning, have a large number of patients who are female physicians and surgeons, as well as male physicians and surgeons, and are victims of interpersonal violence. So this is occurring with your colleagues, not just your patients. Regarding the using a surgeon against you in the divorce, that is something that we unfortunately see all the time. We see the shift work, the long hours, the lack of control when you are in a surgical setting be used against you, and that is something that in any divorce where there is a surgeon involved, it takes an attorney who is really aware of how to make those arguments in front of the judge in order to be able to have that not have that held against you, and make sure to present to the court different schedules and options that are out there that that shows that you can be divorced, you can have full custody of your children, or half custody with your children and still have your career. But that is something that we see regularly.
Oh, the next question is, how do you know when to leave? My husband has intermittent explosive disorder and can be very angry. I'm not afraid of him. However, he did try to choke me in an argument. It happened once 4 years ago. Is that the same thing as intimate partner violence?
Yes, I would say yes. The decision on when to leave is an incredibly personal decision. And there's multiple factors that go into that. So I can't say, this is the moment when it's time to leave. But I can say that when we have incidents where there's strangulation in domestic violence incidents, that is a huge red flag for anyone who's working in the domestic violence world for a lethality risk, which means that the type of violence will escalate to the point of lethal violence. So since that did happen, I would at least keep that in the back of your mind, but when to leave is a very, very personal decision.
I would just like to echo that. You can actually find online something called the Danger Assessment Score. And basically it is a well-validated survey tool to show women and men when they are at risk of actually dying from intimate partner violence. Because I think most survivors, most victims don't actually appreciate the lethality, and choking or having a firearm are the two most lethal things that can occur to you. So I would recommend folks check that out at the Danger Assessment Score. You can just Google it. This says IPV is a challenging situation for many healthcare providers to navigate. Too many are so uncomfortable or ill-equipped to handle this situation and therefore ignore or avoid. Simulation can be a great resource for training healthcare providers to conduct IPV, and they recommend the In Her Shoes simulation activity, which can serve as a starting point for designing simulation-based trainings. And then can I just ask our team to put that into the chat so that other folks can see it, please? But thank you for that reference. We're running out of time here, so I think I'm going to do a couple of, I think we'll take one more question here. I'm going to go to I think as a surgeon, we are more likely to accept abusive relationships given our tough exterior and willingness to accept so much during residency. I had no idea that I was in an abusive relationship. I was a frog in the boiling pot of water. I think that is absolutely true. And I think that, we, as surgeons, the stigma of being a victim of intimate partner violence is, first of all, we don't see ourselves as that, how could we? We're in charge of everything. And, any sign of weakness is weakness. How can we be victims? And I would just, I'm so thankful that you've actually raised this so that we can start bringing down the stigma. Like, this happens to everyone. It happens whether you're a surgeon or a waitress or a nurse or a cop. I mean, intimate partner violence happens to everyone, and we are no different in surgery. Let's see, what time is it here? I think that actually, Jesse, are we concluding now? I'm so sorry we didn't get to all of the questions. We will provide email to Jesse. You're also I'm more than happy to have you email me if you have other questions or concerns. I would like to thank again Emma and Laura for their phenomenal presentations and educating our group today on intimate partner violence, the advocacy and the legal aspects of it. I think this has been an incredibly helpful webinar. I'd also like to thank Jesse and our colleague Kathleen for setting up this seminar or webinar and helping us field all these questions. Intimate partner violence needs to come out of the out of the dark. We need to start speaking about it because it really is happening all around us. And I would encourage us just to have open and honest conversations with our colleagues and our patients. And thank you again so much for this really wonderful webinar.
Thank you again to our presenters and moderator for being here to provide us with this important information today. I echo the sentiment that Dr. Sims has said, as well as the important discussion for this webinar. Just so you guys know, on our screen, you may access more IPV resources through the ACS website by scanning the QR code. And if you have questions about the Intimate Partner Violence Task Force, or even questions or feedback about this webinar, my contact information is on the screen. And as a final reminder, this webinar has been recorded and we will be putting it on the ACS YouTube channel for future viewing. Thank you all so much for coming today. Bye-bye.